I'm Rebecca Kemp Brent. I love scallops. I think they're one of the most fun ways to finish an edge, and I always associate them with the 1930s and the sort of make-do attitude that pervaded the country then. It was an easy way with no added expense to add a little jazz to an edge, and so people used scallops in a lot of different places. They didn't have to buy lace, they didn't have to take the time to do extra embroidery, so scallops were a great alternative. The one thing I think makes some people kind of nervous about scallops is the math. I have a way I'd like to show you that you can create a scalloped edge with no math involved, so I hope this will encourage you to give it a try. I'm going to be demonstrating on a pillow project, and the fabric I have here will be the cuff of my pillowcase. I'm going to start with a piece of freezer paper, and freezer paper you buy at the grocery store in the kitchen section of a department store. It will be right next to the aluminum foil and so forth. And I'm going to cut a strip that's the width of my fabric without the selvages on the end, because I am going to cut those off when I sew, and a little bit wider than I want my scallops to be when they finish. And then I'm going to do what's called accordion folding. And if you're not familiar with that, all that means is that I fold my piece of paper in half, give it a good crease, and then I'm going to take the end and fold that to the middle and crease again. And I just keep going with this until I have the number of layers that is about right for the scallops that I want. You don't even have to count the layers. What I really do is just keep folding until my little packet is about the width that I have in mind for the scallops. The next step is to take a ruler and a pencil and just draw a line on your paper that's about 1.5 inches or 1.75 inches from the edge, and this is going to be the top where the angle between the two scallops falls. Next, you need to draw the curve, and this is a draftsman's compass. You can use that for your drawing, or what most of us do, to tell the truth, we go in our kitchens and we look to see what size dishes we have, cups and saucers. For small scallops, even a big spool of thread can be just what you need. When you draw your scallop, the one thing to keep in mind is that you don't want this to be a half circle. If you go all the way to a half circle for your scallop to make them really deep, you'll find that that angle between the scallops gets to be too tight, and it's really harder to turn the scallops right side out and get a neat finish. So I'm just going to place this on my paper so that the edges are just about at the line that I drew, and then just trace around the curve. And that's going to be my scallop. A handy trick anytime you need to cut through a lot of layers of paper is to use your office stapler. And I'm going to use this to staple my paper layers together. And if you'll notice, I'm stapling just outside the scallop line that I drew. That makes it even easier. It's a great trick because after I finish cutting my scallops, the part that I stapled will actually fall away. And what I'm left with, just like paper dolls, is the pattern for the scallops on my pillowcase. Now I'm going to switch, in case you're wondering why my fabric is suddenly a different color. Just for demonstration purposes, I have a shorter piece that I want to demo on. So we'll pretend now that this is the cuff for our pillowcase. And the first thing is to fold it in half lengthwise. And just give that a press. This is right sides together. Then you take your paper scallops, and freezer paper has one plastic surface and one papery surface. And when you iron over it, that plastic melts just enough to adhere to your fabric, but it peels off beautifully afterwards and doesn't leave any residue. So it's the perfect thing for templates. I'm going to position this on my scallop fabric so that the bottom of my scallops is about 1/4 inch from the folded edge. And then I'm going to just iron this in place. The instructions usually will tell you that you need to use a warm iron And honestly, especially on cotton fabrics, I usually make my iron a little bit hotter than that because I think you get a little better adhesion. Okay, now I'm ready to go over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew right along the edge of my scallops. This is another thing I love about the freezer paper template method. It makes it so easy to stitch the curves because all you have to do is follow right along the edge of that piece of paper. And I'm sewing this time with a contrasting thread. You'll notice that there's dark thread. Of course, when you're making your project, you'll do this with a thread that matches your fabric, but this is so that when I'm demonstrating, you can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to stop and pivot and go around my next scallop. And you just continue this all the way to the end of your band of scallops. And remember, you can make the scallops any size that you want to. And when you come to the edge of your fabric, if you have a little extra fabric, just sort of pretend the curve is still there and continue on off the edge. Now I have my scallops all sewn, and I'm going to go ahead and peel my freezer paper off. If you can leave this on if you want to for greater visibility, but since I have that contrasting thread, I don't have to worry about being able to see where I've stitched. If you do sew through a little bit of the edge of the paper, it's going to be really easy to just peel that off. Now this is one of my favorite tricks for cutting any kind of a curve, because to get a nice straight smooth curve, there are a few things that you have to do. One of them, I'm going to clip all the way down into these valleys between the scallops. And the other is that you need to notch your curved seam allowances, and it's very important that you make those notches small and consistently close together. So absolutely the perfect way to do it is with a pair of pinking shears. I'm just going to use my pinkers and trim this seam allowance down to a scant 1/4 of an inch. And because I have already clipped down into those valleys, you can see that it's going to be really easy when I get ready to start the next. All that's left after that is to turn your scallop fabric right side out. I like to use my finger to sort of smooth the curve, and then we'll take that back to the ironing board and press it flat, and I have a nice row of scallops that's ready to set into my pillowcase.